Do you ever wish you could inspire people to lead with true charisma and inspiration? How did the likes of Martin Luther King, Steve Jobs and so forth inspire millions to follow them? Well, keep listening as we take a deep dive into their secrets. Hi, welcome back to the channel. My name is Dr Aziz. I'm a psychology graduate of Cambridge University and also a medical doctor. In this video, I'll be covering the best-selling book Start With Why. In this animated summary, we'll learn why manipulating customers undermines businesses' long-term viability, how Apple's message taps into the decision-making center of the brain, and how and why some of the major retailers lost their way. Let's get right to it, and it's already given away in the title. The one unique attribute all great leaders demonstrate is that they understand that no one buys into an idea, project, or plan unless they understand why it exists. People do their best work and inspire others when they understand why they're doing what they're doing. The author starts by explaining that manipulating customers brings short-term benefit but undermines companies' long-term viability. Manipulation comes in different forms, but in general it is anything that pushes consumers to buy. Clearance sales, 2-for-1 deals, and so forth. An example given in the book is that of GM Motors in America when it came up against competition from Asian companies such as Toyota starting in the late 90s. It boosted its sales temporarily by offering customers cashback deals, but by 2008 it was losing over $700 for every vehicle sold. Manipulation schemes like these are not sustainable in the long term. Worse still, manipulation certainly does not breed loyalty. What is the difference between, on the one hand, Apple and on the other hand, companies such as Dell, HP, or Toshiba? Truth be told, technically all four companies are pretty equal and make comparable products, but that's not how it plays out in the real world, does it? In the real world, you have die-hard individuals queuing up for hours for the latest iPhone and paying far more. So what is the reason for that? The answer is Apple doesn't just sell products, they affirm their customers' beliefs and values. Apple doesn't confine itself to one niche area of the electronics market, unlike the other companies mentioned. They are selling the whole experience to you. If Apple just wanted to sell computers, it would say, "We make great computers, they're beautifully designed. Want to buy one?" Instead, Apple's actual message is as follows: "Everything we do is about challenging the status quo. We believe in thinking differently and we prove this by making beautiful, user-friendly products. Oh, and we also happen to make great computers. Want to buy one?" Note: there is no manipulation or free stuff. Truth be told, with an Apple product, you're paying for less technology compared to its competitors. But Apple isn't emphasizing the products first and foremost. It is telling the world why it does what it does. Apple tells its audience that if they believe in creativity and thinking outside of the box, Apple is the right company for them. It targets people with their beliefs and values as opposed to seeing them as mere consumers. Again, this is all talking about the why. So why is this kind of message so persuasive? Let's take a look at this biologically. Have you ever thought about why you loved someone? Does it really make sense? Oh, she's beautiful. Oh, he's funny and smart. But there are many people who fall in these categories. You don't love all of them, do you? These aren't the real reasons we fall in love. They are attempts to describe something that is virtually indescribable. And there's a reason for that. The key point being our rational brain does not control our decisions. If we look at the brain broadly, we will see three general areas. On the outside is the neocortex, occupying all four lobes: frontal, parietal, temporal, and occipital. The neocortex is responsible for rational thought and language. Now, the middle sections of the brain make up the limbic system of the brain. The limbic system is a collection of structures involved in processing emotion and memory, including the hippocampus, the amygdala, and the hypothalamus. The limbic system is located within the cerebrum of the brain, immediately below the temporal lobes. It's here in the limbic system where feelings such as loyalty and trust and love reside. Crucially, the limbic system lacks the capacity for language. That is why it's so hard to describe why you love someone. It also explains why a salesman often fails to connect to a customer. They offer all the specs and tech and prices, but information is not what drives behavior. If you want to change behavior, you have to access the limbic system. The next point Sinek, the author, points out is something that relates to the law of diffusion. This says innovation spreads far and wide when they are championed by a minority of true believers. The law of diffusion's theory states that every population can be split into 5 segments. Number 1, innovators. They make up 2.5% of the population and the first to embrace novelty. Number 2, adopters. These are the next 13.5%. Number 3, early majority. Number 4, late majority. And number 5, laggards, people who buy touchscreen phones because button ones just don't exist anymore. The point being here is that the majority will not try something until someone else has recommended it to them. If you want to reach the middle of society, you need a minority of loyalists to get the word out, something they will only do if they believe in the why. A shining example of this is in August 1963 when 250,000 people turned up in the scorching sun of Washington, D.C. to hear Martin Luther King. There were no invites sent out, no websites or WhatsApp invitations. MLK was not the only man or great orator campaigning for equal rights, but he never stopped talking about what he believed in, the why of his campaign. Simon Sinek then goes on to talk about Walmart and how it has developed a reputation for treating its workers badly. Walmart's fixation on increasing its turnover stemmed from an issue that plagues many Western businesses. Even when they're doing well, they don't feel successful. When the author attended an annual meeting called the Gathering of the Titans, where America's top 50 business leaders would congregate, he witnessed something remarkable. When asked if the companies had met their financial targets for the year, 80% raised their hands. But when asked if they felt successful, 80% of the hands went back down. Essentially, this is one of the risks of achieving so much and why some men end up in a perpetual craze of wanting more. As success follows success, they become more and more confident about what they are doing and forget why they are doing it. Do you know who the first man to invent an airplane was? Well, Samuel Langley had it all figured out. He was going to be the first man to fly. A well-connected man with friends in high places including Andrew Carnegie and Alexander Graham Bell, his contacts had helped him land a $50,000 grant from the US War Department. Reporters from the New York Times followed him around, but he flopped. Instead, it was two simple brothers, Wilbur and Orville Wright, with no college degree or government funding, using spare parts from a local bike shop that managed to take flight for the first time in human history. How did this happen? Because they focused on the why. Langley wanted fame and prestige, the what. The Wright brothers, on the other hand, cared deeply about the problem they were trying to solve, the problem of flight and balance, the why. The lesson to learn is that if you hire people for what they can do for you, they will work for your money. But if you hire people who believe in your why, then they'll give you their blood, sweat and tears. Anyway, I hope you learned something useful and enjoyed this summary. A couple of related titles to this book that we've done animated summaries on are How to Win People and Influence People by Dale Carnegie and Deep Work, both of which I'll link here, free for you to watch. If you want to keep learning about psychology, medicine or life hacks, hit the like, subscribe and notifications button. Any suggestions or comments, feel free to post down below. Until next time, stay safe.